From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Israel and Lebanon agree to a 2-month ceasefire after Israeli strikes and spycraft devastate the Hezbollah militia. Meantime, more pushback to the International Criminal Court arrest warrants for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former defense minister, as France suggests it won't comply. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues, Elliot Kaufman and Bill McGurn. The truce that began Wednesday morning local time in the Middle East is supposed to last for 60 days, with Israel withdrawing its forces from southern Lebanon while Hezbollah moves north, creating a buffer zone. This is a piece of what Benjamin Netanyahu said. The continuation of the ceasefire will be dependent on what happens in Lebanon. We will enforce the agreement and respond forcefully to every violation. Here in the United States, President Biden called it good news, suggested it would not affect Israel's ability to act in self-defense. Listen to this.
If Hezbollah or anyone else breaks the deal and poses a direct threat to Israel, then Israel retains the right to self-defense consistent with international law, just like any country when facing a terrorist group pledged to that country's destruction. At the same time, this deal supports Lebanon's sovereignty, and so it heralds a new start for Lebanon, a country that I've seen most of over the years, a country with rich history and culture. If fully implemented, this deal can put Lebanon on a path toward a future that's worthy of its significant past.
Elliot, what do you make of the terms of this ceasefire, and particularly with regard to this question of what happens after 60 days and enforcement of some kind of buffer zone in southern Lebanon between Hezbollah and Israel?
Well, there are a lot of terms, and it's hard to know how much they actually matter, because it's a very strange situation in which almost everyone expects the terms to be disregarded. You have the Lebanese military, called the Lebanese Armed Forces, responsible for disarming Hezbollah and all other armed groups in southern Lebanon, south of the Litani River. Now, the Lebanese military has had that responsibility since the previous Israel-Lebanon war in 2006. It has never really acted on it, and there isn't much of an indication that it's suddenly going to act on it now. So everyone knows that. So then the question becomes, what's happening? What does this deal accomplish? What happens when the Lebanese military fails to take on Hezbollah on Israel's behalf? And the answer is Israel will either act or it won't act. Now, Israel has gotten assurances from the United States in a side letter to the agreement that Israel can take action to stop Hezbollah violations of the deal in that area of southern Lebanon. But north of the Litani River, there is a new committee being formed, a committee led by the United States, which will handle disputes about various compliance issues. How those disputes will go, will it take so long such that Israel can no longer act no matter what the committee rules? We'll have to see, but a lot will be left up in the air for what can Israel enforce? What does it have the will to enforce?
Remarkable, though, Bill, what Israel has accomplished in a matter of months. And remember that Hezbollah for years has been a sword hanging over Israel. And now in a relatively short period, it has all but decimated the Hezbollah leadership. And also, one point of this deal that the Journal's editorial makes is that it delinks Hezbollah's interests from those of Hamas, because Hezbollah had said that it would keep fighting until Israel and Hamas came to some sort of ceasefire. And now we see that in response to the hard power on the ground of Israel, it has gone the other direction.
Yeah, I think that point that you make is why Netanyahu agreed to this. He's besieged on a lot of fronts. By reaching a deal with Hezbollah, he is able to concentrate on Gaza and Hamas and sow confusion in his enemies. And I think we have to be clear, as you suggested, the reason that we have the ceasefire is not because Joe Biden called for it or any international body, but because Israel won it by destroying a lot of Hezbollah infrastructure and decimating its leadership, more than decimating, really wiping out a lot of its top-level leadership. So that is peace through strength, and we'll see if they can maintain it, because if they can maintain it, they're able to focus on the real prize, which is defeating Hamas in Gaza.
But the concern, Elliot, as I understand it, is that the creation of this kind of committee might end up slowing Israeli responses if there are violations by Hezbollah of the terms of any kind of continuing ceasefire. And how is this deal being received by the Israeli public?
I think that's right. That is a concern, and it may be more of a concern with future U.S. administrations. If we were looking forward to the Kamala Harris administration, I think Israelis would be very worried about how the U.S. would handle those disputes over Hezbollah and Lebanese violations as they arise. As to the politics of it in Israel, it's very interesting. Israelis are split on it. It's a very divisive issue. Supporters of the Israeli government tend to be most against the deal. And so you're seeing Prime Minister Netanyahu and some of his allies to his right taking a real gamble, sort of taking on their own base on this, while the opposition leaders, centrist, center-right, center-left, have been calling it a sellout, have been erecting their own sort of stab-in-the-back myth about this. And I just also like to put a point on what Bill was saying. The real accomplishment here isn't the terms of the deal. It is splitting Hezbollah from Hamas. I mean, zoom out. What did Hezbollah accomplish here? Firing 20,000 rockets. It thought it might force Israel to succumb to Hamas's terms in Gaza. It didn't. Israel is still fighting there. Instead, Hezbollah lost its leader, its command chain, its long-range missile stores, its communications, attack tunnels by the border. And for what? It ended up succumbing, having to retreat from its own terms at the outset. And so Hezbollah will take a long time to recover from this, and it doesn't have all that much to show for it.
The ceasefire in Lebanon also allows Israel to turn back toward Hamas and Gaza. Let's listen to what President Biden said on that point.
Far too many civilians in Gaza have suffered, far too much. And Hamas has refused for months and months to negotiate a good faith ceasefire and a hostage deal. And so now Hamas has a choice to make. Their only way out is to release the hostages, including American citizens, which they hold. In the process, bring an end to the fighting, which would make possible a surge of humanitarian relief.
Bill, I also take the point that Elliot made that the context for this deal is the incoming Trump administration. In his first term, President Trump was a pretty stalwart ally of Israel, and I think he's expected to be in a second term as well. On the other hand, Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy, and they play the long game. And so Trump can only serve 4 more years. And if the concern is that this kind of committee is going to potentially bog down any Israeli response, I mean, if Hezbollah's plan here is to regroup and rearm, that could take place over Trump's term and beyond it into the next administration.
Right. It could. I think the incoming Trump administration was part of the reason Hezbollah agreed to this deal. And I assume that Iran gave its tacit approval because they're behind Hezbollah. All things are going to get tougher, I think, for Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, when President Trump takes over, just going by his first term and going by the contrast with Joe Biden. I think, Joe Biden was pushing ceasefires from the beginning, but the wrong way. He wasn't pushing them through strength. It's akin to when the North Vietnamese came to the negotiating table after Nixon bombed Hanoi. You have to have peace through strength. They don't respect that. They have to fear not coming to the table or not agreeing to this. And I think Israel's made the players in the region fear that. It's done incredible things in the military, and that's what made it possible. I think Joe Biden wanted ceasefire as like his legacy and so forth. But really, I think Netanyahu earn this. He's also taking a big risk, as Elliot mentioned. A lot of the government supporters don't like the deal. There's a lot of things that could go south in it. But if he thinks that he can enforce it and free himself up to concentrate on Gaza, it could be a big pivotal point in this war.
Hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's turn to the International Criminal Court in The Hague, which issued arrest warrants last week for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as his former defense chief. This is Prime Minister Netanyahu last week responding to that news.
The decision to issue an arrest warrant against me, the democratically elected Prime Minister of the State of Israel, and our former defense minister, was made by a rogue prosecutor who's trying to extricate himself from sexual harassment charges, and by biased judges who are motivated by anti-Semitic sentiments against the one and only Jewish state. These judges did nothing. They did nothing against the real war crimes committed against the millions who've been murdered or uprooted by the dictatorships in Iran, Syria, and Yemen. Instead, they falsely accused the one democracy in the Middle East, Israel, thereby imperiling the right of all democracies to defend themselves against murderous terrorists and tyrants.
Elliot, what do you make of the ICC's decision to issue these warrants, and particularly whether it represents a real overreach of its claimed authority?
Yeah, I think the International Criminal Court distorted the law, twisted the facts, and like the Prime Minister said, ignored this cloud hanging over its prosecutor. On the legal authority specifically, it's very interesting. The ICC has jurisdiction over member states, but Israel is not a member and Gaza is not a state. So that's a big problem for ICC jurisdiction here. Otherwise, who is the ICC to stand in judgment over anyone there? For many years now, the international community has worked to get around that fundamental barrier for the purpose of bringing up Israel on some charges of something. And the way it did that was to conjure up a state of Palestine. So it says that there is already a Palestinian state, even as the international community excoriates Israel for the self-evident lack of such a state. So they want there to be both a state and also not a state. Once there's a state of Palestine, you can arbitrarily define its borders and say that they include Gaza, say that the Palestinian Authority, which is in the West Bank, is the leader of Gaza. They got kicked out of there forcibly in 2007 and haven't been back. If Mahmoud Abbas would set foot there, he probably wouldn't emerge with his life. Anyway, they just let the Palestinian Authority sign for Hamas's Gaza. Therefore, the state of Palestine is a signed-up member of the ICC, and you can prosecute Israel for actions taken in Gaza. Now, once you have precedents like these, you start to realize how any kind of non-member state is vulnerable. And the U.S. never signed, never ratified the ICC's Rome Statute. So when U.S. senators are looking at this, they say, well, the U.S. is next on the list. And they have good reason for that. I mean, the ICC has an open investigation against U.S. troops in Afghanistan. Now, once they opened that, President Trump imposed sanctions during his first term, and the ICC quieted down and didn't do much with it. President Biden repealed those sanctions when he took over in 2021. But that investigation has never gone away. The ICC could breathe new life into it any time and start going after American troops over whom they should rightly have no jurisdiction.
This jurisdictional issue, interestingly, is being cited now by the French Foreign Ministry. This is part of a statement that it put out on Wednesday today. It says, it reiterates that France will comply with international obligations, but then says this: a state cannot be required to act inconsistently with its obligations under international law with respect to the immunities of states not party to the ICC. Such immunities apply to Prime Minister Netanyahu and other ministers concerned and will have to be taken into account should the ICC request of us their arrest and surrender. So, Bill, suggestion there from the French Foreign Ministry that they agree with the arguments Elliot is laying out, that Israel is not bound by this ICC treaty. ICC does not have jurisdiction over it. And notable, too, that critics in the U.S. of the ICC have long made this argument that it inevitably is on a path to going after U.S. soldiers potentially in war zones and hampering the ability of democracies where there is the rule of law, where there is political accountability for any kind of abuses, to respond to non-state actors and terrorist groups like Hezbollah.
Yeah, they're completely unaccountable. John Bolton, in an article for us, I think about 7 years ago, likened the court to the independent counsel. Like, they're not accountable to anyone. It's a bad idea. The only thing I'd add to Prime Minister Netanyahu's complaint is it's not just a rogue prosecutor. It's really a rogue court. And if you look at it really, it exists only to really go after Israel and the U.S., Western countries, maybe Japan or something. No doubt that's why France is hesitating a little, giving them all this power. They're not accountable to anyone. It's kind of a bad joke, but it can do a lot of mischief. I think the better we make that clear, the safer the world will be. And clearly France is dissenting, but we'll continue to get gestures like this. It's like a lot of other organizations, international, supposedly cloaking themselves in law, but really just a willful exercise of gestures and virtue signaling and so forth, and anti-Western behavior.